My name's Helena Cobbin, and I'm the CEO of Just World Books. And I want to extend a very, very warm welcome to all of you for having turned out tonight to come and celebrate Lillian Rosengarten's beautiful book, Survival and Conscience, From the Shadows of Nazi Germany to the Jewish Boat to Gaza. So now, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Phil Weiss. Phil, I'm sure, is familiar to all of you as the editor-in-chief, the founder. One can even call him the eponymous Phil Weiss, the thing that he's eponymous to being Mondo Weiss.
Lillian, first, can you tell us, this book combines both personal memoir of the immigrant experience and the trauma of Nazi Germany as it unfolded inside your family, and then also your experience as an activist on the Israel-Palestine issue. It merges these two strands, I think, beautifully. They just give each other so much power. You understand why they're together. Tell us how this book came about and how you made that decision to merge these two elements.
The book has a complicated history. I started writing a memoir after my son Phil died in 1996, and as I began to write about him and write about my family, the refugee family that I grew up with, more and more material came out, and I couldn't find a focus. And then when I heard about the Jewish boat, and I was not all that involved in Israel at the time, but when I ended up going on the Jewish boat to Gaza and saw the reality, I knew that I had to write about Israel and Palestine and incorporate that into my book, because it's a book about refugees, about myself as a refugee and Palestinians as refugees, and I am empathic to all refugees, but I was particularly struck by the Palestinian experience, and I just simply had to write about it.
When you say the Palestinian experience of refugees, which is such a central element of the Palestinian consciousness and experience, when did you learn about that?
I learned about that about when I visited Israel in the 70s. I visited some relatives of mine that I had never met who emigrated to Palestine and during the Nazi period, after the Nazi period and so forth. And I met a very influential man, Hans Lebrecht, a distant relative, who showed me another side of Israel. I loved Israel when I first went there, and I wanted it to be all that I hoped it would be, a safe haven for Jews, for everyone in the world. But I was shown another side. The land grabbing, the demolition of the houses, the settlements going up, so many things that I simply could not believe were going on. So that was when I became aware that things were not what they seemed to be in Israel.
So often when Jews and Zionists invoke the Holocaust experience, it's to justify the existence of Israel, the necessity of Israel. And so often when Zionists talk about Palestinian refugees, it's just this horror that a friend of mine, a Zionist, said, this is Israel's nightmare, that the refugees would return. It seems to me you never had that problem of relating to Palestinian refugees. Can you elaborate on why this wasn't an obstacle when all of Israeli Jewish society is so determined, and Zionists in America are so determined that these refugees must not return to the land of their birth or their parents' birth?
I think that Israel is very fearful of the numbers of Palestinians that would return, and that it would present a very unsafe place for Jews to be, because they're afraid of the Palestinians, and they're afraid they're going to be wiped off the earth. This is a paranoid myth as far as I'm concerned. I think that Israel wants to make it's the country Israel a Jewish country only. I believe that it was also a Palestinian country, and that the Palestinians love the land in the same way as the Jews love the land. And I was allowed to freely return to my home. I have a citizenship of Germany. This has done a tremendous amount for me in letting me understand who I am and finding my roots, finding my German Jewish self. I just believe that the Palestinians and Jews have to live together as brothers and in peace, and that the occupation has to stop. That's the first thing.
You recently returned to Germany on a trip, a speaking tour, and as you described that to me, it happened this summer. Lillian did like 9 dates in Germany. It just gave her such strength, and it helped to heal her, and it empowered her. This is a person who, if you read the book, it comes off as something of a shrinking violet when she's a young person in America. A very timid person, afraid to speak her mind. And in the course of this book, we see the kind of growth of an individual, the gaining of strength. And then you go to Germany and in this latest speaking tour, you seem to have developed even more strength. I relate all that to, well, you can respond to that, but the reason I brought it up is because the German tour was controversial in part because of the connections that you have made between the Jewish experience in Germany during the Holocaust and the years leading up to it, and the Palestinian experience in Israel and in occupied Palestine. Can you tell us about these, and it's in the book, there are several analogies, that analogy is made. I'm surely misstating it. Can you explain what the analogy is and whether how strong you feel about that analogy, whether you have any regrets about it, just where you're at in terms of that understanding?
I have to say that I think that we have to look at the situation in Israel and Palestine as one that is not related to the Holocaust, and that the whole history of the Holocaust is used by the Zionists to create guilt and fear that this could happen again and to make Zionism stronger. I think it's a situation in Palestine, Israel, that has to be seen, as I said, for what it is now. I made some references to some analogies. It is not the same as the Holocaust, definitely, but there is a racist underlying concept. There is a very strong nationalism that I'm afraid of, that I see in Zionism, and that is the apartheid, keeping Palestinians separate and disenfranchised, destroying their homes, collective punishment. It is too vast to even explain, even more than that. And the fact that it's so racist that children are taught in Israel from kindergarten that Arabs, Palestinians are dirty and they want to destroy Israel. They know nothing about Palestinian culture. They know nothing about the people. And the racism is what I see. The racism and the nationalism is what I see as the common ground between the two.
Thank you. You know, you have been useful to me personally, and indeed to the Palestinian Solidarity Movement, because you are someone who escaped the Holocaust, and you are an anti-Zionist. And so it's one thing for a Jew of the next generation or a young Jew in this country to say, I'm against Zionism, and older people can say to that person, you just don't understand how vulnerable we are as Jews. Well, you're someone on whom that lesson is meaningless. You very well understand what happened to Jews in Europe, in Central Europe and Eastern Europe, and no one needs to lecture you about that. So that I say that you've been useful because we can say, here is Lillian Rosengarten, who knows the very worst of what was visited upon the Jews, who was part of that historical frame, and yet has come to an understanding of universal rights in Israel and Palestine. Can you tell me, because some of these people here tonight may not be familiar with it, can you tell us about your journey on Israel? when you felt whether you were in love with a place once, right? And tell us those steps in that journey. How long did it take? How long did the love affair last? When did if the scales fell from your eyes, when did that happen? And how do you feel about Zionism today?
That's a whole day's lecture. I don't believe that I was ever a Zionist. I was quite naive in the 70s when I went to Israel. I didn't know much. I knew it was Zionism, but I didn't really know enough about it to care. I wanted to see Israel and experience it for myself. And I must say, the first time I went with my ex-husband, Frank, it was amazing because I felt so safe. I felt no harm can come because I'm Jewish. I loved the land. I loved the moshavs. I loved the kibbutzes. I loved the collective way of what seemed like a socialist life. I loved the dream of the country and hoped that it would be a beacon of light. I was happy for the Jews that they were building something. I did not know at that point about discrimination against Palestinians. It was after a second visit or so when I met with Hans Lebrecht, and who took me, and I wanted to read, there's a little piece in here that I'm going to read, to Ramallah and to Beardside, and I met Palestinian folks, and I saw...
What year was that?
That was in the 70s. It was about 74 or 75. And it was before the wall was up, but I saw the contrast between the occupied land, Beardside, and where I was, where the university is, and the settlements that were growing. They were very small on the hilltop with all the green around it. And I heard stories, and I spoke with people and refugees. I went to a refugee camp. I don't remember which one it was. And then I heard about the land that was taken. And then I read more and more. And then I learned about the Nakba story. I decided to learn about it, the Palestinian story. That was never presented in Israel. So that's how I gradually woke up, and I was horrified. I was just horrified that this land, that these people who were building something, that it should be tainted because other people were being so oppressed and wounded and destroyed, or attempted destroying them.
So Lillian, you're not someone that I would ever think of as being inhibited. From the time I've known you, you're a poet, you're an activist, you're a therapist, you wear your feelings on your sleeve. Were there times that you were inhibited, in as much as you began to have this understanding 35 years ago, were you inhibited about expressing it? And can you tell us how you were able to take the muzzle off your soul?
It was very hard I felt very isolated here in New York, in the States, because it was rather a taboo to question Israel and question what was happening to the Palestinians. I really felt very much alone. I started reading, and it wasn't until actually when I received this note from Haaretz, actually from a friend, that this German Jewish boat was going to sail to Gaza, break the siege. I said, I have to go. I have to discover what's going on, and I was determined I would get on that. And then all hell broke loose for me because I ended up in jail. You'll read about it. We were treated so horribly, like terrorists. I saw a face of Israel that to me was sadly quite psychotic and paranoid. And I, as a refugee from Nazi Germany, who said to me, and I said, I'm a refugee, doesn't that matter? I'm here, and they didn't give a damn, and I was deported for 10 years, but I'm not alone. A lot of people went through this.
The book is also contains some wrenching stories about your family life. The Nazi trauma deeply affected your family. There was a lot of pain and suffering in your family. There were suicides. You lost your son in 1996. It's a very raw memoir that is it's just very deeply affecting. I'm wondering if you can tell us how hard it was to expose these stories, and also to what degree, what you can tell us about the human truth, the hard human truth that these stories serve, because you're not just telling them to exhibit your family's suffering, you're telling them to help other people.
Yes, I'm hoping that this book provides strength and courage for people who read it to face the truth and to stand up and speak out against human rights abuses, to not remain silent, to learn about the occupation and to speak out for the end of the occupation and for any way to help this terrible situation in Palestine, Israel, end. I forgot the other what it.
That's a great answer. That's a great answer. And I think my last question is that I referred to Lillian's tour in Germany. One of Lillian's braveries, in my view, is that anyone who's engaged in this work has been exposed to the anti-Semitism charge. And, you know, to have that charge, I can just say personally, I feel the power. I read it on my screen directed at me. I feel the power draining from my arms. I think, why did I ever expose my views? Why did I ever express myself? I wish I could crawl under a rock. It produces a lot of shameful feelings of the anti-Semitism charge, and yet I bring that up to say that when Lillian was in Germany, this charge was made in newspapers. It was made by the Israeli embassy in Germany. It was published widely.
In the Jerusalem Post.
And Lillian was targeted as an anti-Semite, and she had the that same London moment she had with Colin Connie, she had in Germany. She wrote to a number of her friends. I was one of them. Mark Braverman was another, and we encouraged her to stay.
Connie also.
She felt targeted. And I guess I want to know, Lillian, and you said, and at that point, Lillian changed the format of her talks. And she said she would go to the talks and she would say, I have been labeled as an anti-Semite. This has caused fear in me and shame. I don't know if you said shame, but this has caused fear that I'm being targeted. I almost canceled this trip. I'm going through the fear. I'm going past the labels. I'm pushing past it. And I just find it's a very moving story for me personally, because again, it speaks to her bravery. Again, it serves as a model to others. But Lillian, I want you to tell me about that in your own words. I'm sure that I'm misrepresenting the experience, but how were you able to do that, and what did it produce in you to be smeared in that fashion?
What happened was that Martin Freidart, who was accompanying me on the trip, he's a former pastor and a liberation theologist, a wonderful man. He said, Lillian, there's an article in the Jerusalem Post, very negative. I read it. And the comments, I mean, terrible comments, like I'm old enough to be married to an SS officer, and I should be gassed in the concentration camp, stuff like that. I mean, really, really vicious responses. And I said, Martin, I'm not going. I said, I can't. I'm going home tomorrow. I had about 6 more talks to do. I said, I'm going home. I absolutely can't do this. And he was very nice. He said, look, think about it. He said, if you can't go, I will go in your place. And then I said, I must. So I contacted Phil and Mark and Connie. I wrote to them. I said, what should I do? I'm afraid. How should I handle that? And all three of them, absolutely, they said, if you can push through this, do not be intimidated. You will gain strength. And that is where I found my strength. And I told Martin, I'm going. And it was absolutely extraordinary. It gave me the strength to tell my audience, I told them about it, but I didn't say as much as you said about that. I'm so afraid. I said this is an opportunity to learn that we must stand up to labels of anti-Semitism and anti-Nazism, because any one of us who are working for human rights and our activists are not anti-Semites. We must stand up against it and say, no, I am not that, and still fight for the just cause. And I think that through my own strength, through my own story, I think from my feedback that I provided courage to the people that I spoke to were not Jews. No Jews attended, because the Jews in Germany are very, very strong Zionists. They oppose the work I'm doing. They were all Palestinian German. They were all German activists for Palestinian rights, but not all of them speak out. So I try to say we must find a way that the occupation must end. You must do more than just write articles. You must speak out, break the silence. And that's what happened. So I feel I'm not afraid. I feel that somehow I'm a threat to them. Maybe that's a good thing. I'm not scared. I have to do what I have to do, and I am now more determined than ever. And feel grateful that I'm here talking, that I can do what I'm doing.
Thank you. I wonder if, Lillian, you might read an excerpt, and then if we could open it up to people in the audience who may have questions.
I have two small excerpts I would like to read for you. There is a photograph in which I sit on the lap of my grandmother, Minnie. I am about 14 months old. Her arms hold me and she looks down at me. We are in Frankfurt, Germany. We are in Frankfurt. Germany was already under Nazi leadership. What was she thinking? Why was she alone? My parents to the right are strikingly beautiful. My mother's smile lights up her young face. My father leans into my mother. He does not smile. His face serious, intense. All three wear their wedding rings on their customary right hand. They are elegantly dressed. My Aunt Melita, next to her mother, does not smile. Her husband, my Uncle Paul, sits erect, unsmiling. I wonder about their sad faces. I had idealized this photo, surrounded by a happy, intact family, all together in Germany, while nurtured in an environment of security and love. Sadness lurks behind the photo of the family with deep roots and a promising future. I believe my parents were deeply in love for the first few years of their marriage. The photo took on different meanings as I became aware of the trauma of Nazi Germany that tore families apart. Perhaps my aunt, never able to have children of her own, suffered even then. Decades later, she became mentally ill, involutional melancholia, as it was called in those days. I became aware of this photo when I began to question how I had at one time been a part of a German Jewish family still intact. It was during that time I was invited by the mayor of Ulm to a reunion of German Jews who lived in Ulm and emigrated during the Nazification of Germany. It was the early 1990s. My parents had died, and I would represent the Fritz Lebrecht side of my family, my father. My father's first cousin, Richard, now deceased, took me on a spectacular tour to show me our family villa and various graves. But sadly, I never knew where my paternal grandparents, Gustav and Gisela, that's my given name too, were buried. Perhaps the cemetery had been destroyed. I shall never forget my visit to one of the first notorious camps in the outskirts of Ulm, Coburg Detention Center. It existed from November 1933 to July 1935, built for political prisoners who had resisted Hitler, socialists, and communists. A ghastly place. One felt the ghosts of tortured souls, and death reverberate throughout the cold stone rooms. My body weakened as tears took over. A burst of emotion set free where there were no words to speak. Coburg stands as a documentation center and remains shocking in its brutality. I'll read another little piece. This is on a different theme. In 1992, oh, this was much later than I said to you in the 70s, Hans and I visited Beardside, Hans Lebrecht, a Palestinian town north of Ramallah in the central West Bank. We had lunch in the home of Abbas Abdul Haq, his German-born wife Ursula, and their 4 children. Abbas, a large, rotund, friendly man of about 50, was at the time a Palestinian engineering professor at Beardside University, the first Palestinian university. This was the first time I heard how Israeli soldiers appeared without warning to search homes, mostly in the middle of the night, in order to check for terrorists and weapons. Demolished houses, ghosts of their former selves, stood naked and abandoned, adding to the stark surroundings of a war zone. Where had the families gone? What happened to Abbas and his family? I felt the pain of another time, the Nazification of Germany, the victims of the Nazi dictatorship who were forced to leave their homes. Now in the year 2014, when I hear the commonly used term Judaization of Israel, I cringe.
I would urge anyone who wants to comment or ask a question to come up to the mic.
Lillian, I belong to an organization of professional, clinical, psychoanalytic social workers. On our listserv, we have been forbidden to discuss Israel and Palestine. One of the reasons is they said it's unrelated to clinical social work.
Oh my God.
So I'm wondering, what would you say? How is Israel and Palestine related to clinical social work? That's question number 1. And then I guess I would want to ask you, let's start with that.
You have to find out what they're afraid of, because this is about trauma. This is about counseling trauma. This is about being aware of one of the most brutal situations happening in the world today, where a country is under occupation for over 70 years. And you need to find out why this has been banned, and to get a group of people, and I'll help you in any way I can. By the way, you can contact me to push through this. This is completely very, very disturbing to me. Another issue. Go ahead, you can ask questions.
So Lillian, when you were in Germany, one of the charges when they threw this anti-Semitism charge at you, one of your explanations was that you're an anti-Zionist and you were just for equal rights. You're not trying to deny anybody rights. Could you relate your answer?
I'm not quite sure of the question, except I'm against any form of nationalism that chooses to exist for one group of people only on the backs of somebody else. I think that the idea of a Jewish-only country in a land that belongs also to Palestinians is asking for the worst kind of trouble.
Have you seen progress on this issue in the communities that you live in New York and upstate New York?
Definitely. I feel hopeful because so many things are happening. But I must say it goes back and forth, because I just read this morning that a whole group of Democratic senators, I sent it out to some people in Westpac, are opposing now the agreement with Iran that just was passed, that will and are going to try to turn it around and destroy it. And I also read that J Street, that had come out for this,
The deal.
yeah, the deal, now has turned around and is opposing it. And so that's very disturbing. So it's back and forth, but I do think things are shifting, especially among college students. And there is a lot of resistance, because I know that I read also that there's a whole group in Israel that is opposing any kind of Palestinian discussion that are holding the Jewish community in universities accountable, are labeling them anti-Semites, and are really trying to hurt them for standing up for Palestinian rights. So it's a struggle.
In a personal way, when you think about your experience on this issue, were you subject to, obviously in Germany, you said Germany's a special case, but in the Hudson Valley, in New York City, were you subject to attacks as you began to express yourself? Has that community become more hospitable to your view? Have you had interchanges with Zionists over the years that have been
No.
painful? Or
I'm very careful to know who my friends are. I try to infiltrate the Phillipstown Jewish community. I wanted
That's in Putnam County.
Yeah, there's the Jewish Center, the Phillipstown, I think, not Jewish Center, synagogue, Phillipstown Synagogue, but I was not given permission to speak, and several people in the community that live in my community hardly speak to me. They know I'm an anti-Zionist, so I tend to avoid them. I don't think I'm going to change anybody's mind, and stay with people who I know can be strong enough to affect some change. I don't have discussions with Zionists and try to change anybody's mind. If anybody's interested and wants to talk with me, I'm happy, but I'm not into arguing somebody's political position.
But if a synagogue invited you to have a dialogue like this with not a like-minded person like myself, but someone who is a Zionist who is hostile to your point of view, would you participate in that type of conversation on an equal footing?
I don't know. I have to really think about that. I mean, I don't think I would have much of a chance in a synagogue with a Zionist speaking. I'm not quite sure what my purpose would be.
I think you'd have a chance.
I think that if they asked me to speak about my book and about my life without, and then maybe later questions, that would be fine. But to have a debate, I don't know if I could do that. I'd have to really think about that.
Oh, excuse me. We have another questioner. Please.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking. I was just wondering, what is your opinion on the BDS movement?
I love it. I hope it grows. It's what helped South Africa to free itself. We have to work very hard to make that grow, and it is growing.
It certainly is. Oh, yes. The young lady referred to the BDS movement. It's Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions campaign. It began 10 years ago. And I was just at a conference in Atlanta for the U.S. campaign to end the occupation, and they had leaflets on the wall to mark the 10-year anniversary of the BDS call. And they had these leaflets marked victories of particular companies that had pulled out or that had chosen not to, banks that had chosen not to do business with Israel or with companies that profit off the occupation, municipalities that had decided not to do it. Anyway, all these kind of signal victories. And what was interesting about this timeline is that the first few leaflets were from 2005, 2007, 2008. There were very few in those years. And then suddenly you got to 2009 and there would be a lot of them. And then 2010, many more. And up till now, when there's just these victories are stacking up, it's a very effective movement. And
Nonviolent movement. That's what's so great about it.
Yes, nonviolent movement. So Lillian, I have a romance about the Jewish community that I sort of want, I hope that I speak about the Jewish community's liberation. Well, I'm less interested in what I have to say than what you have to say. So do you have a question?
Please. Hello, Goldie.
Congratulations.
Goldie's an opera singer, may I say. A wonderful singer.
Thank you. Dear friend Lillian, and thank you very much. I would just like to know if you have any comment on the correlation between the horrible, brutal treatment of the Palestinian people and the police killings and racial hatred that we have in our own country?
That's a good question. I think there is quite a connection there. But what stands out in my mind is that tragically the U.S. police are being trained by the military in Israel.
In some cases.
Yes, and so that this whole military thrust and the violence comes from a part, and this is documented. This is documented, and you know that the shift came about 2 years ago, more or less 2 years ago, when the police became an army, and created more and more violence. Yes, where there's violence, there'll always be more violence until things change, and it's pretty awful.
I would just like to observe that at this U.S. campaign conference I was at last weekend, this was the central issue, was and this reflects the left-wing campaign and movement on this question, but the U.S. campaign was saying we really are a merged struggle, that there were voices from Black Lives Matter there, from Dream Defenders. There was, I think, Christian Davis Bailey, a young writer, was one of the speakers. So there's a recognition on the part of organizers that these are related movements and that they will give each other power. So I think that question is being answered in the affirmative, that they are related by people who are doing very important work on the question. So I was going to express my romance about the Jewish community, which is my hope that it could somehow be liberated from Zionism. I credit so much of my own life and intellectual engagement to my being raised in an academic Jewish household. Do you have any of that romance about the Jewish community? There's one of the great things about this book is that the Jewish identity piece is not overpowering at all. You're a universalist. You care about universal human values. You care about all people. But I want to ask that parochial question.
I'm very much a secular Jew. I have a lot of guilt about raising my kids without religion. I think that they've often said to me, why didn't you give us more? Especially my son, Philip, he became a Catholic. He converted. He always said, we were socialists, my ex-husband and I. We were political. We didn't care about religion. I don't care much for organized religion, but I am a very spiritual woman. So I don't care what kind of community, as long as it's a community of humanity.
Are there any other questions out there? Lillian, what about when I said that you come off at the beginning of the book as a little bit of a shrinking violet? Do you think that's fair?
I was so shy. I'm telling you, in my book, I was taught not to speak out. I was very, very shy, and my having a voice and being able to have this book is so amazing. But it has evolved through the years. Many factors. My marriage to a political man, subsequently divorce. The women's movement had a tremendous impact on me. I was very active in the Red Stockings consciousness raising group. And a lot of psychoanalysis, a lot of meditation, a lot of work on myself. And I eventually knew I had to free myself of all my fears. I had so many of them, and it just evolved.
Thank you. Lillian, that lesson which comes, or that message which comes through so strongly in the book, if you think of events in Jerusalem right now, and you think of Israeli society, which is so right, the political culture is so right-wing, you hear things like death to Arabs as a common theme. There's a very strong tribal sense. That lesson would be lost on that society, wouldn't? What is it going to take to change that society?
nothing from the I went to a conference in Stuttgart a couple of months ago, and it was a church conference. It really, one thing about Israel Palestine, it was really amazing. One thing I learned, and I really feel is true: Israel will not change from the inside. It cannot, and all these talks about peace talks are erroneous. Until the occupation is over, there can be no talks. It's bullshit. It really is crazy. And that all the changes, think South Africa, think through the BDS movement, through outside pressure, through the churches, through movements, that's how, through the UN, taking in, showing Israel the way out. Embracing Israel. Israel is a sick society. It needs help. And it has to be shown. And it's going to come from the outside. It can't come from the inside. The settlements have taken over. The land is almost pure Israel now. Israel, the Zionist Israel wants it to be a Jewish state. And it has to be helped from the outside to not succeed in that. In my view, I know that for many Jews this is very controversial.
Abba, could you? Great, thanks.
Hello, I'm Abba Solomon, a researcher about American Zionism. One of the premises of Zionism is that, from Herzl on, is the statement that Jews simply cannot live among other people safely. That there's something about Jews that requires the state of their own for safety because of something unique that makes us vulnerable. And I was wondering what you would say about that mindset, that ideology.
May I be honest? I reject that concept because I think that it reminds me of we are exceptional, chosen people. We are different. We need to be isolated from others. And I think it does nothing good for Judaism. So I have to reject that. I don't know where that comes from. I don't know who said it, but it may be one person's view and in a writer, but I don't.
Right. It's very clear in Herzl, in the Jewish state, Der Judenstaat is where he says explicitly that the entire history of being a Jew is going from place to place and rejection. So
He was an ardent Zionist, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yes. Well, he would take that position, I suppose.
Right. I don't know how you get people in that mindset out of that mindset.
I don't know either. What?
From the outside.
From the outside in. From the outside in. And, yeah, there's a lot to learn about the Palestinian culture.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for
Thanks, Alma.
asking it.
I wanted Lillian to say something about the future. We see quite clearly that looking for a two-state solution, given the fact that Israel has practically taken over all of Palestine, Gaza, and the West Bank.
There is no chance at all. Two-state solution is a myth. There is no two-state. That might have been done years ago, but the land has been taken over. The settlers aren't leaving. And in my view, and I think I am not concerned right now, Connie, about that. My concern is that to stop the occupation. Once the occupation has ended, then there are organizations and groups that are going to figure out how to integrate the Palestinian into the society and how to go about this. So I cannot really answer that. There is no two-state solution. I see a vision someday of them living together. I know a lot of people say that's impossible. It has to be possible. But I think our focus has to be now on stopping the occupation. That is, and nothing, no talks, all of it, nothing can go on without that. Because the Palestinians they can't sit at a table while they're under occupation with all these hostile people around them. The United States is hostile. The European Union, Germany is supporting Israel. Who's going to support Palestine?
Well, Lillian, I wanted to thank you so much. This was a wonderful talk. I just am feeling joy in my heart for you tonight. This is Survival and Conscience. It's a tremendous achievement, really, and I urge you all to buy the book and support Just World Books.